Welcome to the Building Maine podcast, the podcast where we speak with the people who help build up Maine. We talk with companies who make a difference in our lives and hear stories of Mainers who have a unique perspective. From the shoreline to the pine forest, our guests mix it up on business, the environment, energy, and everything else you can toss into a pot like a New England boiled dinner. Now, welcome your host, Matt Marks.
Hey everyone, today in the Building Maine podcast, we have the folks from Defendify with us, a Portland-based cybersecurity company, and we're going to talk about all the things possible in cyber world happening today, well, across the globe. Brought to you today by Landry French Construction and Cross Insurance, our wonderful sponsors. We hope you visit those companies online. And if you want to learn more about Defendify, the easiest way to do it is go to defendify.io. And you can check out their platform and learn more about cybersecurity. They've posted some videos up there, too, to help share with your team so you can understand how to protect your company as we face more scrutiny across the globe about insurance policies related to cybersecurity and the upcoming threats that we've seen from even some terrorist organizations. So take a look at that website. Feel free to shoot us some questions about Defendify and enjoy the podcast. Hey everybody, today we have a special guest, Rob Simopoulos, with co-founder of Defendify, and we're going to be talking all things cybersecurity, all things Maine summer, all this great heat. Rob, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Tell us about your company, and then I have a series of questions about what's happening in your industry today, because we're, construction I never thought would have issues like this, but we're in the ballpark of seeing increased in cyber attacks. But tell us how you got started and what brought you to start this company here in Portland, Maine.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, my business partner Andrew and I started the company as cybersecurity consultants. So we started that company really focusing on small to mid-sized organizations here in Maine. And our teams would go in and do cybersecurity assessments, testing, training, building policies and plans. We realized there was an opportunity for us to build a cybersecurity platform, a software platform to deliver all of those services. So we raised some funds from some local organizations who provide grants and development loans and so on. And we built a cybersecurity platform and rebranded our company to Defendify. Our mission today is really providing an all-in-one cybersecurity platform for small and mid-sized organizations. And
what brought you to that place? What's your background that propelled you into this industry? I mean, the timing is impeccable, right. Number one. Right. What brought you to this world?
So back when I was 18 years old, I had graduated high school, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. My friend told me about a college course where you learned how to hook up spy cameras.
Oh, and I thought that's too funny.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting.
What college was that?
It was up in Toronto, Sheridan College.
Okay, yeah.
And so I went and looked at that, and it looked really interesting. So I said, all right, I'm going to go do that. So what we did is we learned how to install, high-end cameras, access control, card access control, alarm systems, things like that. And got a degree in security. And actually, my first job was at the Toronto International Airport installing those types of systems.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, I grew that. I did that for a while, and then I started my own business up there. So I started my own security company, and I exited that business, which brought me into the United States here, into Maine, where I joined another organization that did security and integrated systems for large enterprise organizations, banks, hospitals, and so on. And I ran that business for a number of years, but saw an opportunity in the cybersecurity area to help these organizations out, which brought us to starting our business.
And when you were in that business, installing cameras like that, were you already thinking about the security of that system as far as keeping that safe from people being able to access, say, an airport camera system?
So back in those days, those were all closed circuit systems. They didn't have connections to the internet. That was many years ago. I would say probably starting, probably 12 to 15 years ago, the system started becoming IP enabled, connecting to those networks and so on. So that industry was starting to begin to talk about, making sure that they're cyber hardening the devices and setting them up properly. That's been going on for quite a while at this point in time, for sure.
And now the ease of access to be able to see what's happening within your facility by being away has a lot of positives to it. But on the other hand, Has there been discussion about, we didn't have this issue before when we had that, closed circuit within a facility? Or are we just past that at this point, that we're just not looking back and we're just trying to figure out how to ensure that nobody can get in?
I think the fact is, in any type of connected system, everything's connected on the network. And, most systems today are moving towards the cloud. So we're talking about everything communicating on the internet, inside networks, with, the ability to have inside access, external access on everything, whether that's a security camera, a computer, a phone, it doesn't matter what it is. And especially if you start looking at building technology, all those systems as well, they need to be remotely supported and managed and all those different things. So you're seeing that across the board on all network and, IP enabled systems for sure.
And I think that, today I know our fire suppression units within a facility, everything now today can be controlled. I was looking the other day at travel trailers that had climate control from your phone. You can control your climate inside your travel trailer. You're out swimming at the lake.
Right.
You come back and have a nice, cool RV.
Yeah, it's wild. And in the bigger buildings as well, the smart building technology, all riding on networks, and giving that ability for all those purposes that we're all aware of. And
with that increased capacity to be able to do those things, which is, I love it. I think it's amazing stuff, and a bit of a nerd when it comes to that. Certainly at my house, it's nice to be able to turn the lights on and off and check things. I think that gives you, especially if you work far away like I do, it's nice to be able to see those things, and have access to it. But that's created a level of vulnerability too, not just with the individual devices, but across systems. And that's really what you've tried to come up with, these policies to help control that, but now a platform, right?
Right, a platform, absolutely. So, cybersecurity is really interesting in the sense that a lot of people think that you just sort of install one little piece of software and you're fully protected. But cybersecurity requires a comprehensive approach, and it's a heck of a lot more than just installing technology. It includes training and building policies and doing assessments and testing. You've got to have a lot of different layers in order to have proper cybersecurity in place.
And now I'd assume, is and I say sure in the small to mid-sized market here, as you start to expand, who's really vulnerable? What today? I see so many things. I think cybersecurity news is probably top of the page almost every day in a newspaper. It doesn't matter where it is.
Right.
What's that look like today? How serious is it from the person scamming on a credit card to taking over your system and locking it up? What are we looking at here in the next few years?
I think the one thing to think about is that, cyber attackers aren't, a lot of times they're not choosing a specific industry. So at this point in time, everybody is at risk. If you store data on your networks, and as an example, just think about inside of your business, what you store even here, sensitive data comes in a bunch of different forms. It's a heck of a lot more than just credit cards. You have employee information. A lot of it's really sensitive. You have customers, drawings, their facility drawings, maybe designs, maybe IT network topologies and things like that as well, especially if they're in secure facilities. You've got price lists. You have special agreements and contracts that you need to protect as well. All of these are things that a cyber attacker can take advantage of. And their purpose comes in a bunch of different ways, shapes, and forms. A lot of them, it's just to cause their crimes to make money. So you're hearing about things like ransomware,
right?
Where they're locking up your systems and encrypting the data. A lot of times today, they're actually taking that data before they actually lock your systems up, and they're using it for extortion and things like that to make sure that you are going to pay them the ransom that's there. We can talk a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, sometimes there are people who just don't like a specific organization, like hacktivists, who will do things for that purpose.
That was big years ago. That was the first round I can remember seeing. It was like
hearing about Anonymous and so on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And then you've also got to think about the insider threat. These are employees, contractors, ex-employees, and contractors who have or had access to the data at some point in time. Now, not all insiders have malicious intent. There's an interesting story I was sharing the other day where this person was working inside of a business, got angry, left the company, but still had access to the Dropbox account. And what she did is she decided she was going to delete all of the files permanently, which she did. And she was sentenced for what she did. And but think about that from that perspective. If you didn't have proper backups in place and all your data was lost, that could be a problem. But an insider threat also might not just be somebody who is malicious. It could just be someone making a mistake.
Sure.
So you're hearing about things like an email coming across to the finance person that looks legitimate, asking them to change payments. And, we get into this wire payment fraud that's occurring. So there's lots of different ways for attackers to cause their crimes and lots of different reasons. And I think that makes it challenging for organizations, especially organizations that don't realize that it's not just enterprise companies that are being attacked. A small to mid-sized organization is a great target because a lot of times they don't have the same type of protection in place. They don't have the awareness that these things are happening, even though we do read and hear about it in the news all the time.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, we've utilized some of that cloud storage software, and it wasn't an option at one time. You had to have individual accounts, and then you could finally set up an administrator account. When they released that, we immediately did it and started to look at, okay, how can we shut off access if we have to shut off access and stuff. Extremely complicated, though. I mean, it's for the first time trying to figure that out and navigate it. It wasn't easy to figure that out.
Limiting access for specific users and so on?
Yeah, for users. And then if they were to leave, it would allow me to take that account over.
Right.
But it was a lot of gray area there, to what was the personal folder versus not. So we had to figure all that stuff out.
For sure. And like one of the key things in cybersecurity is only providing access to the data that individual needs to do their daily job.
Right.
A lot of organizations just leave things wide open. Well, we trust everybody and we'll just let them have access to the files. But fundamentally, understanding what the data is, classifying it, is this, sensitive data? How confidential is it? Is this sales brochures? Well, that doesn't need to be as protected the same way. So going through that data classification and then identifying who can have access to those files and why, and then segmenting it. But it can be a big job when you're first setting it all up, and then obviously maintaining it all the way through.
And this whole idea about making money off of these attacks, small or large companies, is interesting. On the email platform, and we've seen plenty, our share of, hey, I'm out of the office. Can you write a check for so-and-so and mail it here? We've seen those come through, which are sometimes a little bit funny, but it's scary. I mean, I know people have done it and fallen for that trap. When that stuff started to happen and you started to see those targets, one I heard of recently, within a year here in Portland, was a small business, and they had the attacker had actually set up an RSS feed inside their email and was reading their, the written mannerisms of how they characterize things, and they was able to duplicate that. That's way more sophisticated. What does it look like on the enforcement side? What's happening over there? Are they actually prosecuting these cases and investigating them?
Well, they got to find them first.
Right. And that's the part I'm mystified about. How?
Right. And then when they do, a lot of times, I watched a presentation from somebody from the FBI, and they were explaining how these were happening. And the way that he put it was really interesting, that these attackers are in countries, and a lot of times they know who the groups are who are causing these crimes, but they can't go in and get them. So they sit back and wait, and hopefully they'll, leave the country, go on vacation to somewhere warm, and they'll go and pick them up at that point in time. But it's rare that occurs. And, the attackers there's two ways they do it. A lot of times they'll, fly under darkness, but other times they'll announce that they're the ones who caused those crimes. They'll publicly say that they're the ones who did it. And some of those big ones you saw recently, you'll see those groups admitting that they're the ones who caused the crime and that why they're doing it and what their purpose is behind it. What you were sharing, though, that business email compromise is a really interesting thing. And basically what's happening there, and just to run a little scenario, an attacker somehow compromises someone's email. And if they can compromise the finance person's email, it's a great spot to be. And that can be as simple as the finance person just using a really weak password. So maybe their password is password 1, which you should never do, by the way. And, they just keep trying different passwords, or perhaps, there is the dark web where cybercriminals are communicating and trading and selling passwords that they might compromise from different sites. So the attacker may have got the password that way. So they've compromised the password somehow. And then they just go to Office 365. They put their email address and put in that password. Next thing you know, they're in. One of the ways you can protect against that is by having two-factor authentication enabled. And I highly recommend that to people.
I've just started to do that with all the stuff I've used. It takes a while to get that set up.
Right.
Across the board. But it's neat. I always get a text message, and I got to enter the code in order to enter a lot of the stuff I use.
Right. It'll be a text message, or you might have an app on your phone with a code that's rolling there. That way, if someone compromises your password, you've got that second level of verification before they can get in. But let's say you didn't have that, and you get positioned inside someone's email. Well, once you're in there, from anywhere in the world, you can start monitoring emails, and that's exactly what they do. they'll start watching, reading the emails, following the communication. And then when the time is right, so when the communication is going on about a big project, for instance, right, and that they're going to make a payment, maybe there's a wire transfer that's going to happen, they're now sitting in a legitimate, real email system from which they can send their emails back and forth. That's exactly what they do. They'll go in the back end of the email system and they'll start redirecting forward so that they'll say, hey, when this email's sent, auto-delete it. When the response comes back, forward it to us at this other email address. They set up forwarding rules and all types of things. So the person, that finance person who's been compromised, has absolutely no idea that they're sitting in that spot. And their whole goal and mission, and quite often, is to just change that payment arrangement.
Right. Which in this case, that's what they actually did. They interfered with, a possible payment arrangement. They knew because they had access to the email, the person was going to be out that day,
right.
And because I saw their vacation request, and then submitted information, said, geez, we had a client that needed this because the third party had to cut the check. Boom, they made the wire transfer, and luckily the person caught it the next day. But I got to think that's still a lot of work. So how are those folks that are doing that? I mean, obviously there's an expense to that. I mean, it is a risk. What's the return look like for these people? Are they cleaning up?
Oh yeah, they're making a fortune. The cybercrime's in the billions of dollars, and that's continuing to grow. Just ransomware itself is at the billions of dollars, but business email compromise continues. From that person on the other end who's getting that email from that legitimate email source, it's so difficult for them to, they have to be well trained. And I think that that's an important part of cybersecurity today, is also realizing that, it's the employee factor as well. Training the employees to understand what to expect, how to react when someone's asking them to make changes and so on like that, rather than just doing it via email, and understanding that
phone call.
Yeah, anybody can send that in for sure. But there's no doubt that cybercrime, the attackers are making a fortune off of it, and it's really not a lot of work. They can sit in there and monitor. They might have multiple accounts that they're doing that at the same time, and just jumping in when the time is right and hoping for the best.
Now, what started as the whole mantra that it was a young male sitting in the basement of his mom's house making these things happen is certainly not the case. I'm sure it's still happening, but not in the case today, where these takeovers of these massive companies are happening and held hostage. Boy, that's going to be a real problem moving forward between international relations, I assume. What's that look like today?
There's a lot of conversation in the cybersecurity community about, nation states being a part of some of these attacks, and you'll read about them in the news. And governments actually, discussing about whether this is war or how that's going to all be handled. And we'll see how that all works out. A lot of conversations at that front. But there's no doubt that the research that's being produced is showing that some of these major cyber attacks are coming from state-sponsored, attackers. And the fact is that, some of those countries aren't diving in to find them and try to get them at that level either.
We had an incident that we had heard about where the company had ransomware. They were locked up. They couldn't get access to any of their data at all, which was a big deal. And the Department of Homeland Security denied their request to make a payment because they said, boy, we should make this payment. We're not going to make it through this if we don't. They denied it because they're links to terrorist organizations. I wonder how many companies recognize that that's a possible liability today.
That's a new thing they brought up or passed recently. Basically, they've identified specific terrorist groups that are involved in these cyber attacks, and they've stated that if you pay them, you're basically paying terrorists for their crimes. And that you're breaking U.S. law. One of the things that they're stating is that if you do get in that situation, you should be contacting the FBI and having a conversation before you make any payment to them, because you may end up having yourself in that type of situation.
That's going to complicate a lot. And how does that play into our infrastructure, like water and wastewater, those kind of things? What are those facilities doing now to try to protect themselves from these attacks?
Well, I think first off, they're trying to get budget to make sure that they put the right things in place, and that's a challenge for not only schools, but municipalities and so on. I think over the years, there's been significant budget on the IT side. So build the network, support the network, put those things in place. But getting more comprehensive cybersecurity is a new concept in the end, and we need to see budgets start to flow in that direction. Whether that's coming from the government or where that's coming from, I'm not too sure. But the fact is that it's vitally important.
In thinking back of my time working in a more tech environment, everything's changed so much from people buying basic antivirus software now today to having to really manage this. What's that look like for you guys? I mean, how are you addressing it when you meet with a client about what, walk us through that approach of what your company's starting with,
Yeah, the first place to really, in my opinion, the first place to really begin with cybersecurity is conducting assessment and testing. As an example, there are a number of different frameworks. You can call them checklists that you can take your organization through to see what your cybersecurity posture looks like. As an example, it could be, it could be a NIST control framework that might have 150, maybe 160 different checkboxes. They're not really a checklist, but let's call it that. And it goes through, do you have antivirus? Do you have policies? Are you training your team? It goes through that whole thing. When you finish that, you're going to have a much better perspective as to where you stand comprehensively from a cybersecurity perspective. And then from there, you can start to decide where you're going to start to implement tools, technology, training, all those different things. A lot of times what I see, which is a mistake in my opinion, is that people go out and they run out and they try to buy this new fancy technology to install in their computers. But it's a heck of a lot more, as I shared earlier, where you do need the policies and the training and the testing. To go deeper on that assessment side, once you've sort of got that report back that shows where your weaknesses are, you can start doing some technical assessments as well. So a couple tools that we have in Defendify, as an example, is we have a vulnerability scanner. So this is a technology tool that can be run towards the network and inside of the network to look for vulnerabilities. We were talking about the smart building technology.
Yeah.
One of the things people don't realize is that when you install all those IP-enabled devices, the majority of them at some point in time are going to have a security weakness or a flaw that the manufacturer's identified. So they ethically report that as a vulnerability, and they'll release a new update or a patch for that device. But a lot of organizations who buy that equipment just buy it and install it like a project, and they walk away. And so
forget about it. Yeah.
They forget about it. So those devices are sitting in there, and meanwhile, the manufacturer's announced, "Hey, we've got a new patch, we've got a new update. Update all your devices." But no one's there, sort of doing that. A vulnerability scanner will scan computers, servers, IoT devices, building technology devices like security cameras, alarm panels, HVAC systems, and look for those vulnerabilities. And when they're discovered, you'll get that in a report, and you'll know exactly where you need to update and patch. So that's like one of the assessment tools you can have. The other thing you can do if you really want to know, can someone get into my network, is actually a thing called ethical hacking. It's also called penetration testing. And that's where you actually hire a professional to try to break into your network and provide you back a report. So these are skilled engineers who actually will attempt to run tools, technologies, techniques, and try to break into your systems from outside. The same way the bad people do.
Sounds like a dream job to some people.
Yeah, people love it. They're very talented. But you'll get this report back that will detail what they were able to accomplish, how they did it, and where to take the next steps to patch up those holes. So there's lots of different ways to do assessments.
And we saw it not even that long ago. I think it was last summer with the Ring doorbell, where people were getting hit with accessing. Somebody else was accessing their Ring doorbell and seeing what videos and stuff they had to know whether they're home or what other kind of activity might be going on.
Right.
That sort of stuff, how do you capture that? Because obviously they updated their software and their platform, and you had to go through and update it. But God, I got to guess, what percentage of people who have that actually went and did it? It's got to be pretty low.
Well, a lot of the cloud applications today can actually push down updates and patches. So I think the first thing to remember is anytime you purchase any IP-enabled device is to understand that sometimes these things need to happen. So first off is understanding what that technology is going to require. As an example, your smart TV, right in your house. That's an IP-enabled thing. They're actually sending I just did a podcast as well with Ginny Lee, who is a privacy expert, and she was sharing with me that when you accept the terms and conditions of a smart TV, quite often you're accepting that they're allowed to take the data and feed that to third parties and give them all types of information. Those smart TVs need updates and patching as well. So when you buy that IP-enabled device and you put it inside your home or your business, ask yourself, do I have auto updates on? Is it set up that way? Or is it something I have to manage and take care of before you deploy it into your network?
And I'm thinking people are increasingly more aware of what is listening to them or, looking at the data or the stuff they're doing. With social media platforms, we've turned over a lot of our rights, I think, to that software. And it's amazing to me. people who are saying to me, boy, I was talking to my wife about something and all of a sudden now I'm getting ads, through my social media for this stuff. And I'll say to them, geez, if you're searching for that stuff, it knows that you're searching for that. So I think it's raised a level of awareness about that, but we seem to just keep moving on. Like kind of concerns people, but at the same time, they're all like, well, what are you supposed to do about it? But there are steps you can take to prevent or to protect yourself.
Right. It's interesting also about different generations. Like my children, I think they're Gen Z, and the way I see them interacting with social apps like Snapchat, and it's pretty amazing. The first time I saw this, I was mind blown. I was down at the college lacrosse championships, and we're in the big arena down in the big stadium down in Boston, Patriots Place. And I look over, and my daughter's got the app open, and it's looks like a cartoon image of the stadium, and there's little people showing all over. I said, "What are you looking at?" She goes, "Oh, it's my Snap Maps. I can see where everyone's sitting in here." And I go, "No way. Let me see how that works." And she starts zooming out, and you can see anywhere in the world where her friends are at that moment, like literally right to where they're standing within 10 feet. And they're okay with that. They're okay with sharing that data and people following them around. And it's a different perspective today for them compared to other generations like myself. I would never turn that on or allow anyone to track me around. No. Not that I'm doing anything wrong, just from a privacy perspective. So an interesting part of that, I think everybody has a different perspective of their own personal privacy and to what level they want to take it to.
And for Maine companies, though, when you mentioned something that I want to go back to. So you were talking about sort of the dark web. Can you talk a little bit more about that? There's probably some people who aren't even aware of what that means and sort of how that plays into how information is shared in that market.
Sure. It's a place. It's a place where you can go with Tor browsers that hide who you are and hide your identity supposedly. And there's illegal forums and communities where, criminals, hang out, trade, sell data. So there's all types of activity going on there. There's marketplaces where you can buy, stolen passwords. You can buy information on specific companies that might have come up. You can actually buy, there's software as a service programs you can purchase from criminals where you can actually purchase malware attacks and different types of attacks and utilize them. So it's just criminals in the digital world, selling and trading things the same way that it used to be and it still is on the physical side, just in a digital world. And that gives them access to a lot of different tools and information that they can utilize. You'll also see a lot of data being dumped in those areas as well. I get
those notices on occasion. It'll say, hey, you could have been compromised. We'll let you know, but the data was dumped somewhere and found.
Yeah, well, just to play out a scenario. So imagine a cyber criminal decides, hey, I want to get into this pizza place. Like, this is how simple it can be. First off, let's take the first step. You order pizza. You want to do it online. You go to the local pizza place. It says, hey, set up your login and your password. Okay, you do that. But you use the password you use for everything. It's the same password you use for all your emails and you're at work and all these different places. Well, the pizza place doesn't have amazing cybersecurity. So the cyber criminal, hacks into their system and maybe the passwords are being stored in clear text. So you can just get the password and they take that. Well, once they have that, they have an email associated with a password and they're going to start to try that in different systems. But let's say it's your personal email address. Well, it's pretty easy to find a business email address by just looking you up on LinkedIn or in other places, maybe on the company website. And the chances are, unless you have policies in place at your company or you've trained people or you're providing them some password management tool, they might be using the same password in their business world at your company.
In a personal world.
As a personal one. So what happens is once a cyber criminal has used all those passwords, they're just going to dump them. They'll try to sell them, but they may just dump them into one of those underground communities where they'll just take advantage of that, and the next cyber criminal will try to use the passwords in whatever way, shape, or form that they want.
In that world, I got to think, if it was a physical space where that stuff's happening, there's been a lot of activity to try to shut that kind of stuff down on a federal level. But what's that look like with international community for the United States, I should say, to try to, or North America in general, to try to do something about that world? And what are they doing to try to curb that? It's a catch-22. It's the freedom of sharing things, but with so much criminal activity, what's the tactic there?
Well, you can't stop it. I use the word underground, and maybe that's not correct because it's not underground. Anybody could get those browsers
right.
and do it today. In a lot of those criminal areas, it's not easy for people to get into those areas. Like, you have to be known, you have to be invited. You might be recruited to join into one of those groups as well. I have no doubt that the U.S. government is infiltrating and getting in there. There's actually an interesting part of the industry that you might find of interest as well. So, for instance, in Defendify, we have a what we call our stolen password scanner, and what that does is we're aggregating data sources from the dark web, and we're looking for your company's email addresses and any compromised passwords. And it's a credential monitoring solution. So we bubble up, regularly to our customers. Hey, this employee's email address and this password is compromised and being traded and sold in the dark web. The way that data is obtained is really interesting because a lot of times it's the data dumps where they just dump that information. But a lot of times it's being discovered with people, analysts who are in the dark web, obtaining that for companies. Not something we do here at Defendify, but they're large enterprise organizations today will have teams of people in those areas trying to get ahead of it. So being proactive and trying to negotiate data that criminals might have in the dark web about their company. So it's the more information they can get up front. So they might find out early that a cyber attack is going to happen on their organization in a month from now. It's being planned, it's being staged, so they can prepare on their side on the defensive nature. So in essence, it's a lot like war if you really think about it. Like
it seems a lot like it. Yeah,
it exactly is for sure.
And when you have obviously your clients, you want to have them before something happens, but when you run into somebody who's calling you because they have something that's come up, what kind of steps are companies taking first? I mean, I'm assuming they're rapidly dialing companies like yours to say, "Hey, we've got this issue." Right. Is that because I know local law enforcement, this is way out of their world, and it probably takes a bit to get somebody from the feds to call you back. So, what's that look like on their end when they make that phone call to you?
It's a horrible situation for someone to be in. I think the first thing that organizations need to think about is that proactive upfront part, right? So get the assessments, testing, training, train your team, build the policies, get the technology in place, get that secured. But still, at some point in time, there may be an incident that occurs. And really after that, we can call it right of boom is one of the terms that's used. That's more along the lines of, what are you going to do? What's the response plan that's in place? In the first place, an organization, one of the key things they should have is an incident response plan. An incident response plan details what they're going to do in specific scenarios. So if they have a case of ransomware, if someone loses a laptop that has maybe some sensitive data on it or is stolen out of a truck, what are they going to do about all these different situations? An incident response plan will detail step by step what they're going to do to get these things rectified. Now, in the case of, let's say that there's an organization who has been hit by ransomware, and the attackers have locked up the systems. The IT teams don't know where to start. They can't get things rectified. If they don't know where to go next. A lot of organizations, and I highly recommend organizations, they should have cyber insurance in place today. A good cyber insurance policy will help them in remediation in whatever way, shape, or form that might be, and help them with the financial losses. I'll share with you, there's an organization that we were helping who they're a manufacturer, and they're here in Maine, and their supplier down south got hit with ransomware, and their plant was totally shut down. And that manufacturer was running around. They were going to pay the ransom and do everything, but they decided in the end they were going to wipe all of the systems clean and rebuild it again. It took them, I think he shared with me, it took them over 60 days to get back up and running. Oh, it was a massive impact for their business to get fully up and running. So I asked the supplier here, I said, so what did you do? And he said, we had to buy from another supplier. I said, yeah. He goes, I couldn't stop my business. We had to keep running.
Of course.
So in my mind, think about that supply chain impact. So what happens to that supplier is down south? Because I'm sure all of his customers went somewhere else. Devastating. A cyber insurance policy can help support you in that type of situation where they'll actually send remediation teams in to come solve the problem, resolve it, but also maybe provide you some financial recoup dollars on that front.
Kind of like a loss of, rents or something. If you're a commercial landlord, you have a fire or water damage, you can file
exactly the same thing. The way, I think it's really important, but one of the key things up front is it's just like driving a car. You have car insurance, but you don't want to use it.
Right.
So cyber insurance the same way, but you still should drive safely. You should, not be racing around and not drinking and driving, doing all those things. You should be a safe driver. The challenge with a business is that your employees have to do that too.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's really getting them on that same page. Another thing on the cyber insurance side that might be interesting is that there are cyber insurance companies that are paying the ransom.
Oh, we're interesting. Okay.
Yeah, they are paying the ransom. And this is a big conversation in the cyber community, because what people are saying is if they keep paying the ransom, we're never going to stop these crimes. Right. So should they ban it? Should it be outlawed? Should you not be allowed to do that? A lot of organizations are at a point where they don't have any other choice. If they were going to wipe their systems and restart from scratch, it could take them 60 days, 90 days.
That's what I've heard from the companies who've been in this situation. It's, they may never get their data back if they don't do it. And that's
right.
But close the door scenario.
But even if they do pay that money, lots of times they don't get their data back.
Right.
Or the decryption key doesn't work fast enough, or it doesn't work at all, and they just gave those attackers a bunch of money. So it's a tough situation. But going back to your question, I would say being prepared is really key, and being prepared for a bunch of different scenarios. Also, there are more advanced solutions, like here at Defendify. We have our breach detection and response systems, which is where if an attacker can get in the network, our security teams are actually monitoring 24 hours a day. And if we detect a threat, we'll respond. So our teams will dive in and contain that threat, take it out of the network, block it. So having a proactive approach, where someone's doing what we call threat hunting, looking all the time for different anomalies and things like that, can be a big success too. So, but really being prepared is the key.
Yeah, I got to think that's pretty interesting. I mean, the randomness, I'm sure, of how some of these attacks happen, but I wonder in general, how much of this stuff is targeted at specific companies. I mean, what's the rate? I mean, are they phishing for the most part, trying to see what they can grab from somebody, or is it more targeted than?
Well, I think that, and you shared, earlier about the email, like the out of office email. Well, things like that. When an attacker, if you ever got an email where it just says like "hi,"
oh yeah. Right. We had one yesterday. Was do you remember what it was? It was, we're getting more now today about you have a phone message, and we have one of those, sends us our phone message system, and we're getting those now where it says open this link up, you get the phone message thing. We're getting that all the time. I don't know why, but we've had several times here. It looked like it's coming from me, and it was somebody else in the office getting it. And it says, "Hey, can you do this right now?" And sometimes they
send me your phone number.
Yeah, exactly. They look pretty legitimate, and somebody has to text and say, "Hey, just have you seen this?"
Right.
That's not me.
But there's so much. So there's a lot of information about us online. So first off, what I was going to was, if an attacker wanted to know if you're out of office, you could just send thousands of emails to people and just get a hi, send a hi, and then all of a sudden you get back out of office, right? That's that simple. But that can set up an attack, because now I can realize that, this individual is not there. Maybe I'm going to email someone else in the company that I found from LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I know that they're not there. They're on vacation from here to here, but I need some help. Can you help me, with this payment that needs to be made?" Because there's so much social information on us as well. Like if you're a good company and you're doing great marketing, you're talking about your projects and, who you're working with, and, you're on this job site, and all this information's out there. As an example, in Canada, there's a university that had they were building a bunch of new buildings on their campus, and the construction company, they got an email from the construction company saying, "Hey, make the wire transfer payment changes," and they did that, and they sent a lot of money to the cybercriminals. So the university made the mistake. But I have no doubt that university was probably doing a lot of media pitch about, "Hey, we're building a bunch of new buildings here. It's an exciting time at school." All types of things. All that information can be read by anyone in the world, and it just sets up attack vectors. And I'm not saying not to do it, because you have to live in a marketing world. It's about educating your team and having them aware that these types of scams are occurring.
Yeah, and the one I mentioned to you was interesting, because that not only did they have the RSS feed set up for a while, so they got the mannerisms of the person writing, but they also knew that the third party who actually cuts the checks out somewhere in the Midwest must be pretty relaxed, because the email back and forth was a simple email saying, hey, we have this client, they need to have money deposited right away.
Right.
This is what happened. And they did it. They actually sent the money. The FBI was able to stop that at the bank, at the institution, luckily, but that's not normal.
Right. They caught it early enough.
Yeah, they noticed the next morning that had happened. But it was somewhere in the Carolinas, I think. The money was landing in a bank there, and they knew it was going to be shipped out. They actually let the money land there for reasons of tracking it. But I've got to think that, boy, that must happen so frequently. I mean, it's a very not a very sophisticated attack, but very smart how they're doing it. I mean,
it's constantly happening. We're talking to companies, I would say on a weekly basis, who have had this type of thing happen to them, or know of someone at least who's had it happen to them as well. And sometimes those are spoofed as well. They're not always inside the email systems. It could look like it's coming from somebody, and they're just tricking you. Really, the key tip along this whole thing is, if someone's asking you to click on a link, open a file, pay an invoice or take an action, or send some type of confidential information, you have to verify first. And you're going to verify in a source outside of that email system. So that's picking up the phone and calling. And the other caveat is if it's unexpected. So you got an email like you shared, right? It's got this, click on this link, open this file. I wasn't expecting this. All right, I'm not going to touch this until I verify first. I got, someone's sharing a document with me. Oh, interesting. But I wasn't expecting this from him or her. I'm going to verify first. So you're going to pick up the phone and call them, or you're going to send them a text message and ask them first. Hey, we need to make a change to the invoice. All right, let's pick up the phone and call these people. And for a lot of people, they feel like, I'm going to annoy the customer, I'm going to frustrate them. You can start off that conversation by simply saying, hey, we take cybersecurity really seriously. We verify anything like this first. Just want to reach out. Did you really send this to me? No, I didn't. Quite often. No, I didn't. My my email's been hacked. We hear it all the time.
And how does this, I got to think exponentially, this is going to get tougher to some degree with more stuff becoming connected. I mean, you get Wi-Fi in your car, construction equipment, for example, not only GPS, but they're now running units where they can sit in their office and run a bulldozer. As those things start to change, I got to assume the risk accelerates with how we handle it. And the reward for those people who are in that business is going to be greater.
The threat landscape is widening
as
everything becomes more interconnected, for sure.
So for companies like yours, as you start to adjust to that, I've got to think you've had pretty decent growth in this market today, and it's great. I love that you're in Portland. I think that's terrific.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the state of Maine's been phenomenal for us. Yeah, I think that from a business perspective, cybersecurity right now is a great way to describe it is to look at physical security. So think about the first alarm system, I think, was made in the late 1800s.
Was it that early?
Yeah, it was way back. That's when they first invented it. And, then first it was like security guards, and then that alarm system, and it became automated, and it just started improving to today where you look at physical security systems for buildings. It's unbelievable.
Oh, it's incredible.
Amazing technology. Cybersecurity is really at that early stage. We're really just getting started. I look at it a lot like maybe we're in the 1940s or 1950s or something like that, like the advent, the beginning of it all. And it can be, even more complicated than a physical security system as well, because it is so wide. There's so many different variables in play depending on the organization. But it doesn't mean that every organization has to have, enterprise level security. They just really need to get started. So It's an awareness thing where we're sitting at today. So for us here at Defendify, yes, we've had rapid growth. And I think that a key part of it is the awareness. It's really happening. Organizations are realizing they have to get cybersecurity in place. They don't necessarily have cybersecurity professionals on staff because most small and mid-sized organizations don't.
I would say, agree.
Their IT people, if asked, like, do we have great cybersecurity? They'd say, hey, quite often they say, hey, I'm not a cybersecurity specialist. And that's positioned us well. And, going back to the state of Maine, the state of Maine has been an amazing place to build a company for us.
Tell me about that. I love to hear that. It's an interesting time in Maine.
It is.
And to hear you say that is exciting.
The startup scene in Maine is unbelievable. And it's growing very quickly. The Rue Institute coming into Portland now. They have startup incubators there. But for our organization, there's handful of really key organizations that have been a big part in our growth. As a startup, one of the key things is getting funding. Having money come in so you could build your technology and take it to market and so on. The first one is the Maine Technology Institute. That group will provide anybody who has a great technology idea, they'll provide you a grant to get your idea sort of on paper and developed to a specific point. And if you can come up with this idea and then get it to that point, they'll provide you development loans. So as an example, they might provide you a $250,000 development loan, no interest, pay it back when, after your product becomes commercially in market and out there. I think you get 3 years after and you pay it back without any interest. That's incredible.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah. So that organization is growing, and they're supporting a lot of the different startups that are there. There's also another program called the FAME. It's by the Finance Authority of Maine. And what they have is a tax credit. So what this tax credit does for startups is, if you're approved, and most startups are, if you raise capital for, to build your product and go to market, whether you get it from a private investor or a venture cap group, and there's two different ways that works. But let's imagine you went out and private investors invested in your business, and they're from the state of Maine. They get 40% of their investment back in a tax credit. So they're funding organizations who are growing. So they're hiring more employees in the state of Maine and growing their business. They'll get 40% back. But what's happened is they've changed that a little while ago, where if a venture group from out of state invests in that company here in Maine, they'll get back 40% of their investment in a check.
It's tremendous.
So what's happening now is we're seeing investment coming out of state into Maine, funding startups so that they can grow and become, worldwide entities. And
a little incubator because of that.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So these are the type of programs that are having a huge difference. And then when your business gets to another point, the Maine Venture Fund is a local venture-backed group that is funding startups to take them to the next level. And some of these companies you hear about who have been successful, have done very, very well, are backed by most of these organizations.
And with your company, what's that like for you to recruit in that market to get people to be attracted to come to Maine? What kind of interaction are you having with those folks when they first start talking to you about a position here?
A lot of people are saying, I want to move to Maine.
Are they? Yeah. So, and we're getting that. We saw it the first time. I don't know if it's a pandemic or whatnot, but we started to get nailed pretty hard as California had problems with people out there saying, hey, tell me about Maine, and can I come out there and do some construction work?
Right. Well, to take a step back, so I moved from Toronto to Maine after exiting my company up there. And my wife came down in the summer. So I lived here for a few months and flew back and forth for a little while. And she came down right when school finished with the kids. I think she was here for 30 days. And she turned to me and said, I want to live here forever. This is the greatest place on earth.
What made her say that? I mean, what brought...
She just loved it. She loved the community. It was the summertime and we were on the beaches. But she understands winter too, because we're from Toronto. So the cold wasn't going to bother her. But it was all those great things that she was seeing, that community. Let's not kid ourselves. You can go to the beach in the summer. You can go into Portland and have great restaurants. You can go to Bangor or Augusta, and there's great restaurants there. You can go skiing. You can go and ski if you want. And if you want a big city life, Boston's only a couple hours away, right?
Right.
2.5, and you're into Boston, maybe 3 hours max. So you're getting all of that great stuff. You're getting an outdoor life. You're getting the ability to have, a small city life as well. And then if you want the big city, it's pretty close. And
from your perspective, you're seeing folks who are now, is that a change though, that people are saying, yeah, I want to move to Maine? Or has it always been pretry much the same way?
No, I would say that's been that's shifted in the past couple of years. Yeah. People are realizing that Maine's a really, really special place. I remember when I first came down here, people would say, Maine, why would you live there? Now people are saying, Maine, I want to live there. So it's definitely shifted.
Yeah, I think people are appreciating the fact that the hustle and bustle life, you can still have part of that, but when you want to unwind, you shut that off. Yeah. You can't do that in a lot of places.
No, you can't do that.
Maine, you can.
Oh, in Toronto, I would sit in traffic jams for hours, just to go to a meeting. It's definitely a different way of life. I think it's really wonderful. It's a really special place.
And your company, tell me where you're doing business today. What's your footprint look like?
So amazingly, we're doing business in over 20 countries. So we have customers in over 20 countries. Yeah. What happened when COVID hit and the pandemic, one of the big growth factors for our business was the change to work from home. So organizations were really starting to get nervous about, how do I go out and protect my organization or check to make sure that we have the right things in place? And at that time, we said to ourselves, how can we help out these companies? And we'd actually released a free version of our solution. So it was a version of our product called Essentials. And anybody can go today, defendify.io/essentials. And you can get yourself one of those assessment tools. So you can actually perform an assessment. You can do network vulnerability scanning. So you can do a scan against your network and get results. And you'll also get threat alerts. Well, we released that, and we had thousands and thousands and thousands of companies come and start utilizing that to help.
It was great.
Yeah, it was great. So it gave us a great, growth trajectory, but it also, I think as a founder here, it felt great to be able to help organizations make that shift.
Yeah, especially when everybody was just up in the
Right.
arms about what's it going to look like.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, from we had some of the largest organizations in Maine that told us they just snapped their fingers one day and said, "Okay, everybody, bring your laptop home," and then they did, and they thought, "Oh no,
Right.
now
Right.
what?
Yeah.
This is a different model."
Exactly. And now it's getting a little more complicated because a lot of organizations are moving to hybrid mode, so it's going to be the half and half. So, yeah, it's a key part.
And, when we look at some of the bigger picture stuff that happened, like the oil pipeline, those sort of attacks, and what's your take on those kind of things that are across the world we're seeing? And they make big news. I mean, it's a big deal. It's affecting the gas shortage, obviously, issue in the Mid-Atlantic went on for a long time. I mean, those are major disruptors.
Right.
What do you see the future in sort of those kind of attacks happening?
I think the one thing that always rolls around in my mind when I think of like the SolarWinds attack and the pipeline is the supply chain part of cybersecurity. One entity being breached usually is just not impacting them. As I shared before about that manufacturer, right? There's always a supply chain impact. So vendors, customers, whoever else down the line is going to be impacted, like you saw with the pipeline, where you couldn't get gas. There's a gas shortage and all those different types of things that occur there. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you have a cyber incident in your organization that's substantial enough, everyone else is going to be impacted. What we've seen because of this is that enterprise organizations are realizing that their vendors, as an example, their vendors having an incident may impact them.
Sure.
So as an example, if you're a construction company, a law firm, a technology contractor, whatever you are, your customer is providing you some type of sensitive information on you. And if you have a breach at your organization, it's going to impact them. So we've seen a huge increase in what we call vendor cybersecurity assessments. That's where your customer is sending you this questionnaire, and it's lengthy, and it's going to ask you about all those comprehensive things. Do you have policies, plans, training, all that? And they're sending that to their customers, and they're saying, "Hey, we want this return if you want to continue to do business with us."
We go through it with our credit card vendor.
Right.
We went through that whole step process.
Right. That is going to continue to increase in rate.
That's not easy for a small business. I mean, that took us a month to get through that paperwork. I can imagine if you're doing transactions, if you're a bar or restaurant, you're taking orders, your software is communicating what you need and all those kind of things. That's going to be tough for them to get through.
Yeah, and we've seen in some industries that do RFPs and bids and so on, where it's starting to be written in there that you will have specific cybersecurity and controls in place in order to win this business, and you'll have to prove, and they'll have to do checks on a regular basis, and then legal agreements on the data security side that are also outlining and saying, hey, if you have a breach at your organization, you will let us know if it impacts us within 24 hours, 48 hours. So one of the things that I've been sharing with a lot of groups is to say, not only do you need your general attorney anymore, I'd highly recommend getting yourself a data security expert as well, a data security attorney who is an expert in that field, because those agreements are going to come more and more often. And if you do have a breach and you don't respond properly, you could be liable in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's much like, the thing you were talking about with your smart TV. You're not going to read that disclaimer. People are just clicking the button. And same thing with those forms. If you don't take the time to look at it down the road, you could be really in a mess.
Yeah, or you could lose a deal. Let's say you're bidding a project, and that does come across the table and says, we've got these 3 final people we're looking at. What's your cybersecurity look like? Imagine that rolled across, and you couldn't check the boxes, or you didn't have proper things in place, but the competitor did. It may influence them to go in that direction and do business with people who have proper cybersecurity in place.
And the work that you're doing today, are your folks physically on site at your clients, or is it a mix, or are you doing most of the stuff from your office here? How does that work for you all?
Yeah, so we're a software platform. So it's a web application people log into and utilize, and they work directly with our success managers. So part and parcel between, having a software application that they log into and utilize, with our team providing them guidance and support.
And that must be a comfort level for those folks who are signing those agreements now, to know that, they have Defendify on their side to constantly be monitoring, so they can give an update to their client if there is a clause. That
we're enabling them to have the ability, first off, to get ahead of that, and be able to have those things in place so that they can check a lot of those boxes and say, we have these things.
And what's that timeline look like for them? If somebody's calling you today, and they said, look, we had this scare, we got through it, we really want to make sure we don't have those mistakes again, and they're downloading the platform. I mean, what's that conversation look like with your folks?
Well, our team goes through, identifying what their needs are. And then designing the platform. Today, that the platform has 13 unique modules. So for some people, it might be just getting started. So they're like, listen, we're just going to pick these ones and get going, but we're going to budget for the future to do these other things. I encourage that. One of the things I say is get started. Cybersecurity is always evolving. It's not a project you do once and it's over. It's like an ongoing posture and a program. So just get started. If you're going to start with a handful of modules and get things rolling, that's wonderful, and you can grow into the platform. Others will just do the whole thing and get everything into check, but it just depends on their budgets and so on. But our team will, once the engagement's in place, our success managers dive in, help them onboard into the platform. We can have someone up and running with, training their team, policies, plans, getting the assessments and testing running within a week.
Yeah, no, that's a great turnaround. Yeah, that's fast.
Very quickly, yeah.
And when you looking at the future, what keeps you awake at night on some of these things? Is it the increased level of threats that we're seeing, or is it something different?
I've been in security my whole life, so I've seen lots of different things, whether that's physical intrusion or an incident. I think a lot around that cybersecurity is complicated for a lot of people. That does it keep me up at night? Not so much as like just me trying to understand how to help people out. Because I think as a CEO or like a non-IT business leader, you're sitting there trying to understand what this is, like what's going on. You're reading it about in the news. You're hearing from people having these incidents. Like, where do you start and where do you begin? And I'll share with you that it's not an IT problem. So this is not something you just say, oh, my IT person takes care of it. This is a business risk issue, and it's time to get sort of ahead of it and start to understand it. I don't think you can just put your head in the sand anymore and say, like, it's not going to impact me, or they have it handled. The same way you would look at business, any type of business risk that you have, cybersecurity needs to be there too. A lot of boards today are having conversations about cybersecurity. And I'm not saying you need to become a technical expert, but you need to start asking questions of your team or your provider to say, what can we do more? Do we need to do more? And then start to implement the budgets around that so you can get protected. Because if you don't, then that's a business risk that you took. You decided to take that from that perspective. So for me, the one thing that rolls around my head is, how can we educate people more on the topic and provide them, non-tech talk, easy to understand ways of explaining cybersecurity. And we do that every day. So what we do is we try to do webinars and podcasts and try to share with people what cybersecurity really is. As an example, on our website, you can go and you can watch a webinar I did, the ABCs of cybersecurity, the basics, just take a little bit of time and understand it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a lot of people scratching their heads saying, man, that's another thing I got to deal with in business.
There's so many things.
Many things, but it's with your platform, I mean, it's amazing tool to be able to offer that, because I can't imagine what the first step would be for most companies. I'm assuming we'd probably get a phone call for the most part if somebody said, who do we turn to? Because it's just a serious issue. I mean, people are just trying to do their business, and to think that somebody would be actively trying to extort that hard work is really tough to take.
Yeah, it's an awful thought.
And are you seeing in the market, are there increased prosecutions on this? Is there more focus on this, or is it still pretty much the same as it has been?
I think there's a lot more awareness in that the government entities are getting their hands around a little bit more and putting things in place. The Biden administration recently released some, as a presidential order to have specific organizations start to improve cybersecurity. So it is definitely improving there for sure.
Yeah, that's good. And I think on the state level, I mean, I've seen them focus more on the crimes that are happening associated with cybersecurity. Especially the stuff with some of the more serious crimes related with children and those kind of things, but not so much on the cyber side. You've got to think in years in the future, there's going to have to be more availability, I would say, in law enforcement for that kind of service.
Yeah, I think you have no choice, but the question is, where are the attacks coming from? That's
I don't know.
Biggest thing. I shared earlier about the insider threat, for sure. If it's someone who's in your company who does something like that, or somebody local that they can identify, for sure, I'm sure they'll be deeply involved. But when it's a state actor state-sponsored actor threat actor from another country, how do you go about it as local law enforcement? Pretty difficult.
No, very difficult. I think it's difficult for the feds.
There's nothing you can do about it.
No.
Absolutely, right.
Now, on this journey you've been on, starting a business and launching it here in Maine, what's been some of the exciting moments that you've been able to, celebrate?
That's a great question. I think the most exciting thing was when we launched our platform. That was a pivotal moment for us as a company. It was, we spent a lot of time talking about, should we just continue as cybersecurity consultants, or should we build software and build a platform? And our decision to do that with my business partner, Andrew, I think was a great one. And the real reason why we decided to go down that road was because we said to ourselves, as consultants, it's going to be very difficult to get to a lot of the small and mid-sized companies because it's people. You have to go there. You have to do this, that
a lot of mom and pop shops.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how can we do it so that we can provide it to them in a cost-effective manner that's easy to use, right? That can be implemented quickly. It had to be done with software. So I think that shift, that was a big pivot for us. I think it was a wonderful thing. And I'll never forget that first day when we went live with the platform, and it was like we took it to market and put our existing customers into it, and they gave us the feedback, and they're like, "This is great. This is awesome."
Yeah, that's terrific.
It felt really good.
It had to have. I mean, that's a huge achievement to be able to do that. And from when you started, what was that timeline like?
Oh my goodness, a year and a half to the first version, maybe a year, and we're just about to release a new version of the product, which is really exciting. And we've kept building onto it. When we first started, it had policies and assessments, and I never shared with you, but one of the tools that's in Defendify is a phishing simulator.
Okay.
So I'll tell you how that works. So you were sharing with us that those emails that come across and they look like click on this and open that. With Defendify, if you turn on your phishing simulator, it will send those types of emails to your employees randomly.
To test and see what the response is on it,
to
right?
test them. And if they click on the link or they open the file and they shouldn't, it will spot train them on what they should have done differently. And what ends up happening is you get reports in Defendify showing you how everyone performed, and then an overall group as well. But you'll start to see a reduction in the number of people interacting with those emails as they get spot trained and tested through that solution. So
what has this done with when you talk about devices, just reminded me with so much has changed. We were big in construction. The tablets are still big. I mean, I think a lot of them are using tablets in the field, and we've using this software, this building information modeling, which I don't know if you've had a chance to see, but you actually construct the facility virtually, every part of it, and then can lay out that 3D modeling to your client. But also when you're in the field, you're able to check off the stuff you've done and the stuff that's coming forward. But tablets are big, but with smartphones increasing their capacity, how does that change your model as far as making sure those devices are protected, which is a heck of a lot harder, I would assume, than the tablet or computer that gets brought in at night.
Well, the same thing. You're receiving email on your phone, so you could still be duped into taking action in a different way. Updates and patches are really important even on those devices. So when your iPhone pops that message and says, you've got to do an update on your phone, you should be doing that as soon as you get an opportunity to do it. I'll share with you one of the concerns I have on the cybersecurity side from that front, which is the bring your own device challenge. So I see a lot of organizations who today are not providing their employees company-owned phones and computers and not deploying any technology on those employee-owned devices to protect them in any way, shape, or form. So imagine the big shift to work from home, or even one of those devices you're talking about. If that's employee-owned and you don't have any protection or controls on it, and you're allowing them to access company data, access company email, access files anytime that they want, you've taken a pretty significant business risk that you have no control on that device. So when that employee loses their phone and they don't have a password to get into it or anything like that, you have nothing in place. I see this more and more often. Organizations with 1,000 employees, 500 employees who have nothing in place protecting those devices. When it's company owned, then you should have the controls in place to be able to, a managed device management, a mobile device management solution where maybe you can delete the data or remove access to the data or do things that you need to do. But remember, every computer is storing data directly onto it, right? So you need to have some protection in there. If you do allow employees to use their own devices for company activity, there are technology suites available that provide mobile device management solutions. So a lot of times what it will do is it will containerize the company data in one specific section, like in an application, where remotely, if that device was lost, they can delete that container and doesn't have access to it anymore and so on. But an area of concern in my mind for a lot of organizations is getting that under control. In my opinion, the best way to do it is company-owned devices.
It's without having company-owned devices, sort of like you just left the building open, 24/7.
Absolutely. Yeah, and left it up to the employee to decide. So it's interesting, like you go behind the firewall, like, the box that's between the internet connection and the network. So you actually look into the organization on the internal network side. They've got all kinds of crazy protection there, right? You've got your email filtering system, You've got the firewall, you've got antivirus, you got all that stuff inside there. But then you just let an employee use their own device at any time to access the data from the cloud. Big risk.
And I noticed just recently on one of the new Apple updates on the iPhone, it might be getting too deep on some of this, but they started to require that they ask whether or not they can track you outside using the app. It never used to do that before. And now they've said, can you track across platforms or not? So Apple's implemented a new security measure. Is the use of apps changing how security? Is there more risk, or is there enough control at the developer side to protect yourself from it?
I've read lots of articles and research papers on malicious apps ending up in the stores, Google Play and different areas like that, where people have downloaded them and put them in there. And those organizations who, like Apple and Google and so on, are trying to get that under better control. But yeah, anytime you deploy any app on your phone, or at any point, anytime you install any software, you really need to understand what it's doing, where it's communicating. And I think that it's really interesting what's happening with the devices now. The manufacturers, Apple's doing a pretty wild job where they're identifying and telling you, like, this device wants to use your microphone, this device wants to do this, it wants to access your contacts. You take a little bit of time and think about it. Why does that device need access to my contacts? So those are the questions you have to ask yourself.
No, it's wild to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's wild. And I'm happy that they started to change that as in notifying you that your camera's being used,
right,
or voice access is happening.
Privacy is such a huge topic right now. Everyone's, it's big on everyone's mind. So I think that they're playing into that and understanding that and have to make change.
It's a hard thing to keep up with. It is a personal consumer. If you step aside from the business side of it, it's pretty tough. Like you mentioned, we were talking earlier about Snapchat. You can see anybody who's on there. Not only your contacts, you can also see where they are if they don't turn off their location around the world. It's pretty. Those are big changes in life.
Oh, absolutely. Well, never mind the social media. People posting on Facebook everywhere they are and every picture and every meal they had. Everything's there for people to absorb.
Yeah, and with companies pushed more towards that market, I've got to think the exposure there has grown for them as well.
Yeah, companies today are posting all types of stuff on social media. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. It's becoming a big part of it too, for sure.
Which can be a positive tool, but obviously protecting yourself on it is critical. So tell us what else you want to share today about your company, Defendify, and sort of what's next. Obviously, got a new platform coming out. What do you want to share with folks?
Yeah, I think back again to what I said, which is really just get started. I think it's, the awareness side. There's a lot of education and things that you can educate yourself if you're not a technical resource inside of the organization or an IT business leader, and you're running a company. It's really time to just start to understand the business risks associated with cybersecurity and start to take action. And I understand that you may not have budget today for it. You may have to budget in the future. I think that you can expect that it's going to be a regular expense line, on the P&L moving forward. But it's time to get something started, and starting with an assessment is a great place, to understand where you stand.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, as far as budgeting for it, just having had conversations with companies who went through, and needed access to their server and was locked up. I mean, tragic. I mean, very difficult. They had to start building shadow resources, rebuilding database. I mean, all that stuff while they were trying to just figure out, can they even recover anything or pay a ransom? I mean, that cost is, that's just massive.
It's a horrible thing to go through. But yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out and talk to us, you can go to our website, Defendify.io, and learn more about cybersecurity. We have some great webinars and podcasts that are all educational based to teach you a little bit about the business side of that, and also a little bit on the technical side as well.
Well, we'd love to hear it, Rob. I mean, I think we're going to have you at one of our meetings with all of our folks in the near future here. And in the meantime, they can jump to your website, Defendify.io. Got that right?
You got it.
And get the platform downloaded, start talking to you folks, and protect your folks, your people. Keep them working. You don't have these delays.
Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate the time today. Love that you're here in Maine. Glad to see that, and want to keep talking to you as your company continues to grow. Appreciate the time.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.